this time that are skipping class. Okay, y'all, this is what we got. Everything that's purple that's up here, exam 2, and there's really not a whole lot. Chapter 3, chapter 5, and chapter 11. And on these, just to give you an idea, the exam is going to go from 9:30 to 1:30, second floor in the library, just like last time. I'll pull something in Blackboard. I'll have signs on the doors of your classrooms so you know where to go. Just come in. If you want to take it during your regular class time, you want to take it early, you want to take it later, however it is that you want to do it, and we'll go with it from there. And then at 1:30, it cuts, it's over, there's really nothing beyond 1:30. So if you want to have some extra time, if you just want to take it in 50 minutes, if you want to take the whole 4 hours, you can do it, but just make sure that you've got your schedule arranged for that. Now, as far as the stuff that's going for chapter 3, let's just start there, because this is the one that's just the smallest piece on here. And there's really just 3 terms. If you remember, on the first exam, we had commerce power. And the 3 that we didn't get to were the tax and spend power, full faith and credit, and privileges and immunities. And what I had told you on these was make sure that you know what they mean, make sure that you have comfortable examples for these. So do y'all have any questions about tax and spend, full faith and credit, or privileges and immunities? Go ahead.
Full faith and credit.
What was full faith and credit clause? Anybody remember? Or the 3? Go ahead.
It's like, I can give you an example. So if I have a license here in Maryland,
Yeah.
and I go to like New Jersey, it's still going to be valid there.
Yeah, that's right. Full faith and credit clause basically says if you've got a valid document issued by one state, that it is in fact going to be recognized by other states. And a driver's license was a really, really good example of this. Can you think of the other 2 examples that I had given y'all?
The slave one. The slave documents. Like,
You know, that's actually the fugitive slave clause did fall under full faith and credit. I guess I could test you on this because we did talk about slavery this chapter. But full faith and credit, the fugitive slave clause was justified by this. So if you came in with documentation saying that somebody was your property, your slave, and then you provided this, even if it was in a free state, they would have to recognize it. But there were 2 other modern day examples. Anybody remember? There was marriage.
oh yeah.
Marriage license, you don't have to remarry, and I had mentioned to you that if they wanted to legalize gay marriage, maybe they could have done it under the full faith and credit clause from the very beginning of the Constitution. And then the other one, does anybody remember what the other one was?
Did it have to do with criminals?
It did have to do with criminals, extradition. The idea that if you catch somebody wanted for a crime in another state, they're not going to try the person for the crime that they're wanted for in another state, but they'll hold them and then extradite them, ultimately sending them back to the state where they're wanted. So keep those in mind. But full faith and credit is actually not a bad one when you put all these examples out there. Tax and spend and privileges and immunities. Do y'all remember anything about those? Go ahead.
Congress has the power to tax and spend on anything, really.
Okay, on anything. Do you remember what we talked about with the drinking age?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Ren.
You said something like about the age limit.
Okay, setting a drinking age. Yeah, go ahead.
Due to the powers of the commerce law, they don't have to make it like they can give you extra money if they gave extra money to whoever like raised their drinking age to 21. Because
Well, now you're getting into commerce, and this is just dealing with tax and spend. Go ahead.
There's no national drinking age.
There is no national drinking age.
And yeah, but the states that they raise their drinking age, they pay less in taxes because of something.
You're really,
They
really.
get money
Something
for
like that.
roads. It's like 5%.
5% is what it
5%,
is.
yeah.
Every state gets federal funding for their highways. And if you remember when we were talking about this, the federal government has no power to create a national drinking age. So what they did as an experiment was they said, listen, we can't force you to do this, but we will give you 5% free money in your highway fund if you will raise your drinking age up to 21. And states did it. Now, do you remember the state that sued? Louisiana didn't sue, but they didn't take the money. South Dakota was the state that actually sued. It was South Dakota versus Dole. And do you remember what South Dakota said, why they were suing?
They're forcing them to like take the money.
They said, this is like blackmail. They said, you're extorting us, basically, is what you're doing. There's really no choice at all. I mean, what's the thing that politicians never have enough of? They never have enough money. And basically they're saying, if you're going to give us free money and all we have to do is raise our drinking age, you know what, we're going to get killed politically if we don't take this money. So they're basically saying the federal government has never had this power in the entire history of the country, number one. Number two, you're basically blackmailing us. You can't do this. I mean, this is wrong on so many levels. Anybody remember what the federal government said? It kind of had to do with the Newports. Go ahead.
They said no because it was voluntarily. Like,
So it was voluntary?
and I can't remember that.
Go ahead.
They weren't going to take away money, they were just giving you extra money.
You know, that was the other thing, and that's what the court ended up saying. The federal government ended up saying, listen, you know, if we give you money, we're free to place conditions on the money that we tax and spend for you. And we've given you conditions, and if you will make these conditions, meaning raise your drinking age, then you get the 5%. If you will not accept the conditions, then you are free voluntarily to not accept the 5%. And you remember what the court ultimately held? They said it was legal for the federal government to do this. Ethan, say that again.
Because they weren't taking away money, they were giving you extra money.
The court said in South Dakota versus Dole, if we said we're going to take 5% away from what your regular funds were, and if you didn't raise your drinking age, this is now forcing you. But they said, we're really just giving you an incentive. We're not taking anything away from you. We're just giving you 5% extra, which you're free to refuse, and you would be no worse off by refusing that 5% than you would have been had we not offered this deal. So yeah, this was a pretty good example of this. And anything about privileges and immunities, just really quick, because there's probably 4 or 5 questions about these on there. Go ahead. What was privileges and immunities? This was my personal story, if you remember. Go ahead, Christina.
That citizens of like one state can't be discriminated against in another state?
Partially, I guess. Privileges and immunities is an obscure provision. And it basically says privileges and immunities. There are certain things that all citizens are going to be able to do. You have the right to petition your government for the redress of grievances. You have the right to be able to use the navigable waterways. And then the one that we focused on was you had the right to travel. Travel was the one that we were talking about. But unemployment was the case. Do you remember the state?
Oh, Pennsylvania. No.
Not
It was South Carolina, North Carolina.
Connecticut was the state. Guy in South Carolina lost his job, went to the library and did some research to find who had the highest unemployment benefits, and he found that Connecticut did. And if you remember, he moved his state up to Connecticut, had never worked there before, and immediately on day one applied for benefits. What did the Connecticut governor say? Go ahead.
He said he made too much, right?
He didn't say that. Didn't say that. What did the Connecticut governor say about this? Did the Connecticut governor give them the benefits? Okay, so why would you think the Connecticut governor wouldn't? Yes.
Is it because he just moved there?
He just moved there. He hadn't paid into the system. The Connecticut governor basically said, who has paid for these benefits? The Connecticans. We're still not sure if that's a word. The Connecticans are the ones that paid for these benefits. And if people all over the country start coming into Connecticut and they start using these benefits and they haven't paid for them, the people that are getting screwed are the Connecticans. And my job as the state governor is to protect against this. Supreme Court took a look at this case, and the Supreme Court ultimately held you do have the right. But they said, crazily enough, using privileges and immunities because we're protecting the right to travel. If you denied somebody the ability to get these benefits, then they wouldn't be traveling as much. So yeah, Connecticut had to pay these out. And the example that I gave you was, and remember, he moved from a low standard of living state, South Carolina, to a high standard of living state, Connecticut, remember? Well, the thing on this is that unemployment is going to give you a percentage of what you need. So if you get a percentage of low, but then you go to high, you're still just going to get the same percentage roughly of high. You might get more money, but it costs more to live there, so you really don't get ahead. You remember what I did with Pennsylvania? Go ahead.
You took the high benefits and then you moved to a low
I took the high benefits and moved to a low standard of living state, North Carolina, and I actually made money off of these benefits that way. And understand on this, was it legal to this day? I still really don't know. I probably shouldn't be saying this on camera. But the idea is that the unemployment benefits come from privileges and immunities. And the trick on this was the right to travel. So make sure you're comfortable with these examples. Tax and spend is the drinking age. Full faith and credit is marriage, fugitive slave clause, driver's license, and extradition. And then privileges and immunities is dealing with unemployment benefits. Looking at some others up here and just going into the other chapter, I'll go back over to chapter 5, and this might be the big one for this chapter. I'm going to go ahead and pull up these terms right quick, and you can take a look at these. I'm not sure what is going on with this computer right now, but hopefully this will open up. And as you take a look at these, have y'all got any questions about anything here as far as the terms are concerned? Go ahead, Christine.
What do you mean by like under other groups? Knowing in quotes.
Don't worry about that. Yeah, don't worry about that. Yes?
Can you explain what idleness is?
I'm sorry?
Could you explain what number 3 is? What is idleness?
Oh, that's from the reading quiz. Yeah, I'm not going to test you on that tomorrow, so let's just focus on the stuff, the terms for tomorrow. Go ahead. What was invidious? We talked about invidious discrimination, and I had given you some examples. Does anybody remember what it was? I had mentioned to you the idea that it is perfectly legal to discriminate as long as you've got some kind of a rational basis. And I know that opens a lot of doors, you know, who was going to determine if something's rational or not, these kinds of things. But for our purpose, you know, if you're 16 you can drive, but if you're 15 you can't, that's technically illegal discrimination. Or if you're 18 and you can vote, but 17 you can't, that's legal discrimination. Or if you're 21, you can drink legally, and if you're 20, you can't. All of these are examples of legal discrimination that's out there. And the one that I had given you as well was, go into the amusement park where the sign said you have to be at least this tall to ride this ride. And I guess the thought is, and I don't know the psychology behind 21 and 20 and 18 and 17, 16 and 15, but I know that if you're so small that you're going to get thrown out of a ride to your death, well, that's a pretty logical reason why you would not allow somebody that's too small to ride a particular ride. Invidious discrimination is when you try and discriminate, and you're trying to discriminate without that rational component. And invidious discrimination is not legal at all. So if you said, I am not going to hire somebody because they play soccer. I mean, I understand why you wouldn't want somebody to work for you that plays soccer, but technically speaking, that's invidious discrimination because it's not rational, like, you know, the sign dealing with the height. Ethan, I think I had seen your hand.
Yeah, I was gonna say, would that, like, an example of that be like the woman in Michigan who wanted to only have a Christian roommate, or would that be something?
See, you know, I'll be honest on that one, and I think this would be one where in his own way, Jason from one of the other classes would get really upset because he always would say, who is it that determines if something is invidious or irrational or not? And when you think about it, the state treated it as invidious discrimination, but you could also argue that if somebody wanted to live with somebody that was like the same religion, I could kind of understand why somebody maybe would want to do that.
Based on the court real.
But based on the article, yeah, that would have been a good one. Anything else with the terms? Plessy versus Ferguson. What was the statement of law that came from Plessy versus Ferguson? You remember what was significant about Homer Plessy? Go ahead.
So he was a black man that was like fairly light.
He was a black man who was very light. Okay, that may not be the best way of saying it, but
Basically, like, it was a law that said like you had to have a certain amount of percentage in you to be considered African American, right?
yeah.
I think his great grandfather.
It was 1/8 is what it was, and it was the great-grandfather. So Homer Plessy was a very, 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 very light-skinned black man, to the point where if you'd have just looked at him, you'd have felt like he was a white guy, just because of his appearance. And you remember what he tried to do?
Yeah, I remember what he tried to do.
Go ahead.
They didn't know he was black, right? But he told them he was black.
He
to
did.
say what they would do.
What was he trying to do though?
So mature.
Train. He was trying to buy a ticket on the whites only car as a black man. And he wanted to get caught, and he wanted to get charged, and he wanted to go to court in Plessy versus Ferguson to challenge this. And ultimately, he did buy the ticket. He told them, the police got him when he was getting onto the car.